Okay, so here we go again. So when we left off, what we had created was an activity layout, but we didn't have the ability to navigate here. So we're going to go into our main activity Kotlin file now and set up that intent to come over to this scene. So activity main, oops. Web browser activity. So that one line of code creates an intent for us and takes, when we do start activity, will take us to our web browser activity class. So in our web browser activity class, we need to set up our binding so that we can access our elements. And then when it loads, we can call the layout inflator, which, as I understand it, is going to go through that layout file, find all our IDs, and place them into this specialty object. So binding equals and we'll set our view to be the root of that content view. Yeah, it is one of those days, isn't it? Alrighty, so our web activity, our back to main button is going to be real easy. So we'll do that first. So when they click that back to main button, just finish, close this activity down. So that's nice and easy. Now, this is where some new material is coming in for us. So we're going to create an implicit intent to web services. So again, the idea of the difference between implicit and explicit is implicit, I don't actually know what application is going to launch. I know what services I'm asking for. So in this case, I'm asking for web services. But I'll go back to my slides here. The idea is if I launch a web service, I don't know what browser is on a particular device and is designated as the default browser. I just don't know that. Android devices, out of the box will automatically go to a Chrome browser, but that doesn't mean that the person didn't load Firefox and make it the default browser. So we don't know. So that's why it's not explicit. We really don't know what's going to come up here. So the way that we handle this is when someone's pushing that load URL button, we'll set an on-click listener. And the first thing we need to do is make sure that they've given us a URL. So I'm going to say if our URL edit text, and we'll get the text from it, convert it to a string. If that is null or blank or empty, whatever you want to use, then we'll put a little message at the bottom. So we'll send them a toast. Okay, so if they don't have a URL in there, we basically don't do anything. Else, let's grab that whatever string they gave us and pretend that it's URL and pass it to a browser. So we're going to say var URL, ask the binding for that and when you go to a browser, if I started typing like weather.ca, the browser eventually added HTTPS, and DNS lookup says weather.ca translates to the weathernetwork.com/ca. So that's all kind of done, between the browser and DNS lookups. But the way the browsers appear to work on the device, if I put weather.ca, you see how here it's actually putting HTTP. That's not happening on the mobile devices. So we need to just sort of protect against that. So we're going to check So basically, this is saying if the URL does not start with HTTP or it does not start with HTTPS, then let's just add it to the front. And then, so that's just going to modify our URL slightly. And now we can create an implicit intent. I'm going to say val intent. So this is calling my intents constructor. And I added the little import up there. Okay. So we're calling the intent constructor. And this time, what we're going to do is we're going to pass in something called intent dot action view. So that's a pre-built thing in Android. So an action view will basically go to whatever the browser service is. You're going to view something. So question in the group chat. Thank you for the questions. Would you check the value before doing the intent, or would you do it after, like to make sure it is even in URL format? So are you saying that we should do, I mean, we are doing this before we're calling the intent. Okay, so the question is, should there be well, it's I'm not sure if I can perfectly answer that, Eric, because we don't know what the extensions would be. Um, like Lindsay added in there .ca.com, but um, it could be dot just about anything, right? So that I don't know. There's a lot more possibilities than .ca or .com. So I think we're just going to have to expect our user to have a decently formatted name. But I think a lot of people forget the HTTP part. That's why I added that little protection. The reality is, if we were building an application, probably we'd be sending them to a very specific URL that we know. We wouldn't get them to add it because they would just go to a browser directly. Like it could be, let's say we're building some kind of shopping application and they get to a certain thing and they want to learn more about a product. You'd click on the image of the product and it would maybe launch in a browser and get additional information. As a general rule, you try to keep people, try to remove their ability to make mistakes. But yeah, there's so many possible extensions there. I don't think we could guess. I don't think we could guess. And then we're going to add data to the intent. So kind of like we did with that put extra. Let me just finish this bit, Eric, and I'll come back to that, okay? So intent.data. So the URI class is going to parse our URL. And I don't know all the ins and outs of the URI class. It could be that when it parses the URL, it's checking some of the content automatically. I'm not perfectly sure on that, to be honest. But my guess is, just like when you do parse int, like if you're trying to pull an integer out of a string, it is validating to a certain extent. And then we can launch the intent. So you see with all these intents, it always ends up the same. We call the method start activity and we pass in an intent. It's just how we build up the intent, it changes. So let's try running this. Okay, a little bit busy here. I got things overlapping. And you may be saying, what? How come? Because in our layout, it looks good. So the thing is, this layout is, this particular one's based on Pixel, the Pixel product. And then my AVD, let's see here, my phone that I'm using in the emulator is at Nexus 5. So they have a slightly different aspect ratio. And so what happens is these items that are, dynamically put in places are, moving differently. So that's why it maybe doesn't look ideal here. So we're going to play around with that a little bit to make it look nicer. So we'll do that. But for now, if I type in something like weather.ca and I click on load URL, it passes me to Chrome. Okay. So the first time you use an emulator, you have to set it up. And you have to. And so now it took me to weather.ca, which became the weather network, and I can accept their policies. So it works. But you can see what we did there with our implicit intent was to launch was to launch an intent for action view. And that's where the Android device knows what application is the action view. So we don't actually talk to that. Now in the group chat, Eric had asked about this URI, or not specifically this line of code. You're saying, can we not scrub this URL a little bit better? Because right now, it could be any string. It could be supercalifragilisticexpialidocious with no .ca or anything, and it could fail. And it's true. We could add some more validation to that. We could use regex. I'm not sure in the Kotlin or in the Android framework if perhaps they have a URL validator, but I would think this line of code here is doing that. I don't know what it'll do if we give it bad data. Let's try it. So I'll click my little square. If you're used to iPhone, you may not know how to navigate around on these things. I'm a little newer to them. Go back to here. So if I just said weather and said load URL, it will still pass me, it looks like, to Chrome, which will then struggle with it. Let's break it. Every tale forever. Yeah, it's true. It's how we learn, right? So I'm going to defer going any deeper on that. I think you're right that we could, try to add some more validation to prevent the user from it. Lindsay really wants to get to SMS. Cool. It is cool to do. Yeah. Now, I will warn you, the SMS, you do have to have an Android device to make that work. If you're using the emulator, that won't work. Because it needs to actually it needs to be coming from a real device. Otherwise, we'd be spammed out the wazoo. Okay. So I'll clean this up in my supplemental video that, well, we can clean a couple things up real quick. Let me just try a couple quick things here. So really, the issue here is that my image in the middle is just a little bit too big, and I've got a little too much margin top and bottom here. So the margins are real quick to change. If I go to my project and under my dimensions, I had set the margins at 50 dp. So let's just change that to 10 dp. Whoops. So that's one really quick change. And what's cool is, so now it reloaded. I didn't have to, I did this little A restart because I'm just changing the layout a little. So that got me part way. The bottom button looks good now. These top ones still a little crowded. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my image and I want to scale it down a little. And to do that, I'm going to my web browser layout. And in here, I'm going to change the scale type to be center inside. And rather than be to the top of the parent, I'm going to put it to the top or the bottom of this button. So this will be top to bottom of my load URL button. And I'm going to do the same kind of thing on the bottom side. So bottom, rather than attaching it to the parent, I'm going to say attach the bottom to the top of my back to main button. And then I'm going to, I played around with this a bit last night. I'm going to adjust the bounds. So now these are going to be anchored. It's going to be centered between these buttons now. And then the last thing that I want to do is I'm just going to add a little bit of padding. So even if it comes close to these edges, it'll just give me that little bit of buffer. So I'm just going to say padding. Let's just, I don't know, we'll call it 5. Do we have a padding in here? Let's see. We don't have a padding yet. So we'll say 5 pp. You see, if you look really carefully, it just pushed things in a little bit. So let's retry that. It wants me to restart it. Too many changes. Sometimes you can get away with just doing this little A, and it will restart the activity you're already in without having to reload the whole application. Oh, there we go. So now you can see there's a little bit of space around everything, and my image is still nice and big, so it looks great. Okay, so you know, let's get the SMS working for Lindsay, because I feel like it's going to make her day. All right, so we need an SMS activity. So hopefully you're starting to see a pattern here. I'm going to right click, new, activity, empty activity, and we'll call this one the SMS activity. And I'm going to add, there's my controller and view, add them to GitHub. Just closing down, we got so many things open. So here's our SMS activity. And I'm going to add a background to it. So I'm in my constraint layout, and I'll say background. And there's one of the drawables we have was SMS. So just hit enter, and we should get this nice image popping up. And what we want to do is we want to basically put some text boxes or text fields over here for our user to enter in a message, a phone number and a message, and then hit the go button. So I'm going to go to design view here, and we're going to drag in text. I clicked on plain text. I'm going to drag that in and drop it here. And I'm going to drag in another one right underneath it. And this is top one's going to be our phone number. The bottom one will be our message. And so let's configure those now. So in terms of the layout, where they are, I'm going to say end to end of the parent. So put it off to the right. And I'll put it towards the top. So top to top of parent. And again, if you prefer doing like the drag and drop with these, see there, I've got these little blue balls, those blue circles. That's what the constraints are doing. Okay, and I'm going to put a little. I'm going to bring it down a little bit. So I'll say margin top, and I'll just use the standard margin we've been using, which brings it down a little. And then we're going to align this one relative to this one. And I think we can even put a little margin at the end here. So let's do margin and so you see it came out a little from the right and down a little from the top. Now this is what I want people's phone numbers to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say hint. And in here I'm going to say enter phone number. And do alt enter to extract our string resource. And then for this piece, I'm going to go back to my design view. Yeah, it's recording. There's a little blue circle down here with the pause. Thanks. Yeah, no, it's good. I missed the entire middle of the class, so please, if you think it's not there, let me know. All right, so I'm going to go to design view. Now, I want these two items to line up. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to control click here in the component tree. So I've selected both items. Right, so I held down control and left clicked, so I've got both. Now I'm going to right click, and here I can align the left edges. So what that does is it will always align this second one horizontally to start at the same spot as the one above it. And then for my vertical constraint, I can just say attach the top to the bottom of the item above it, which has got a terrible name. So we're going to change that name to be shift by holding down shift and pushing F6. And now I can type in, let's do phone edit text. And you can see here the input type. It's kind of interesting. And they've built a lot of things into Android Studio. The input type here, it's highlighting it, and it's saying phone edit text suggests that this is a phone number, but does not include phone in the input type. So rather than have the input type as someone's name, which would bring up an alphanumeric keypad, what if we start typing phone in here? Now, when the keypad comes up, it'll only give us things that are viable on a phone, like the numbers. And then our next one down is the message we want. So I'm going to change this to be a hint and say enter message. Alt enter to extract the string resource. So now we have a place for the user to enter things, but it's actually really hard to see, right? Like it's gray on a gray background going across an image. I mean, that's a very hard thing to see. But we actually already created a background image. Remember in our main activity, we already set that up. So what we can do with these edit text is we can just say, well, background, and in our drawable folder, we'll use the rectangle. And that's pretty tiny, so we can add a little padding. And I think we created one called padding. Yeah, we did, right at the bottom. So now, consistently through our app, all of our edit text will look the same. And I can just copy those two lines to this edit text too. And since these are really tight together, I can add a little space in here. And the way I'll do it is I'll just say margin top and put our little pre-built margin in here. So it's so fantastic, right? Because that dimension is in one spot. I can change it globally throughout my file, like in one keystroke, without having to go to every different activity. So we're close. But now what we need is the ability for the user to either return to the main screen or the ability to actually send the SMS. And the way that we're going to do that is I'm going to show you how to use an image button. So let's go to our design layout. And if you click on buttons on the left-hand side, you can see there's a button, but then there's several other types of buttons in here. And the second one down is called an image button. So I'm going to select that and drag it into my scene. Let go. And on the image button, we can put any of our existing drawings, or we can do a lot of other kind of pre-built items, or we can create our own new icons. And that's what we're going to do today. So up here in the where it says plus, it says add resource to this module. Okay, so the way I got here again was I clicked on buttons, I dragged an image button, and now I'm going to click on plus, and I want a vector asset. So vectors can be resized quite easily. And you see where it says clip art? If you click on that, it actually loads all the icons that are available to Android out of the box. And so in here, if I want like a back button or something that's going to take me back, if I start typing back, I can see all of its suggestions. So you can see back up, backspace. This one's an arrow back. So I think that's really closest to what I want. So I'm going to click on that and say OK. You can leave the name as is, or you can change it. I'm going to call this the back arrow. And the size here, 24 dp, is actually quite tiny. So I'm going to change that size to be 50 by 50. Now the color, I'm going to leave it just as the default color. We can add a tint to it after the fact if we want to. Okay, so I named it back arrow. You can see the clip art view of it. I made it 50 by 50. And I'm going to say next. And you see they're going to put it into the drawable folder for us. So I say finish. And now the top one here is the back arrow. So I can select it and say OK. And we'll add that to GitHub. And for some reason, it didn't add the image. Why not? Came up with button star instead. Okay, so let's do drawable. And there's my back arrow. Okay, so if yours for some reason mine didn't grab the image, I thought I'd selected it, but obviously something went wrong there. You can still go into your XML, and your source is going to be at drawable back arrow. Now it's still technically floating, so we're going to line it up just like we've lined up these ones. So if I want the right edge, like the end of my object, to line up with the ends of these objects, what I can do is I can say end to end of, and then I just have to put the ID for one of these. So do our phone edit text. So now the back edges line up. And if you're looking at it going, but they don't really line up, there's a little difference there. That's that 5 dp padding that we added, and we're gonna deal with that too. So we've lined it up, and then we want the top of this to go to the bottom of our enter message, which was this terrible name of edit text person name too. So that brings it down. So now we need to, it's in position. We need to give it a name. So this one, I'm going to call it back to main button. And this second edit text, the message edit text, I'm going to do Shift F6. And I'm going to say message edit text. And the last thing that we want here, or that we need here, is we need or want the button to sort of look like our other fields. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the background to be our rectangle. So now it's going to have the rounded corners and sort of match the other items. And we'll give it a little margin on the top as well. So at this point, we can enter a phone number, we can enter a message, we can go back to the main activity, but we need something to add our SMS. So I'm going to copy the image button. So just grab all that, Control C, paste it. Now, this one will be our SMS button. And we want the end of it. So we're going to be end to start of our back to main button. And then we're going to add a little margin. So margin and margin. But we need a different image. We need an image that reflects an SMS. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go to my drawable folder up here on the left. So under App, Resources, Drawable, right click, New, and that was a vector asset. So it's just another way of doing it. I'm just showing you different pathways. So here I've got my clip art. I click on it, and if I say SMS, it comes up with these icons. So I'll just grab this SMS one. I'll change the size so that it matches the other one to 50. And I'm going to call this one SMS underscore icon. If you call it SMS, we already have an sms.webp image asset, and it'll add some conflict. So call it SMS icon, make it 50 by 50, say next. It'll put it in the drawable folder, finish. So now I'll add that. Now in my SMS button, if I just start typing SMS, I can see the SMS icon, and it comes up. Now, we want to style this. We can obviously change that kind of muted browny looking color to be something more interesting. But in the interest of time in making our SMS function, let's just get this thing functioning. And I will put all of that into paste bin. Or paste of code, whichever one comes up first. So I put that in the chat. So if you got disconnected, you can basically get reconnected. The only real potential things are if you don't have some of these dimensions or these drawable assets that I added. Okay, so in our main activity, we need to navigate to this scene. As you see, I'm talking fast because we're at the end of class. So let's add okay. So line 38 in our main activity is going to allow us to navigate to the SMS. And now I'm going to go to the SMS activity. And we'll set up our binding. Okay, so our back to main button, that's the easiest one. And then we'll set up our click listener for our SMS button. So first, we need to get the phone number, and we need to get the message. So I'm going to say var. Okay, so we'll get the phone and the message. And I'm just going to check if they're not empty. Really, what we should do is validate, that this is a legit phone number, for example. But I'm just going to do the super fast way of if phone number is not empty and the message is not empty, then we're going to create it's a little bit different how they do this one, but we're creating a URI called SMS2, and we pass in the phone number. And then we create our intent. And the action is send to. So again, we don't know what service or what application that's really going to launch. And we pass in this URI, which says we want the SMS service, and we passed in the phone number. And then we put in the extra SMS body and whatever message the user had typed. And we start the activity. And if the phone number or message is blank, then we're going to go toast, make the text. Okay, fingers crossed. This should work. Here we go. It's odd that it actually came up to this. Let me just reload that. I don't know why. I don't know why it's jumping right to this. It's really bizarre. it should launch to the main activity. All right, I'm not going to worry about it because it's in a class. So because we set this up to be a phone number, if I type in a phone number like 705-555-1234, and we say hello message, I click on my SMS, and you can see that it brought up the SMS service, even though I didn't have a valid phone number, and it passed in the body, and it's of course simulating sending it. It's not really sending it. If you use this on your own device, if you have an Android phone, this should actually pull up your SMS service and send a proper text message. I got some nice feedback in the chat. That's so cool. Excellent. That's where I'm going to leave it for this week. And I'm going to re-record the second 30 minutes of the class, or 40 minutes, however long that was, which is unfortunate. And I'll add in a supplemental little thing about showing copying to a clipboard, so we can the idea is you can copy any content you want, and then you can paste it into like a notepad or any other service that accepts text. So that's the end of this class. Sorry about the technical hurdles with my internet, and then I forgot to record. So it'll be a little delayed getting these up on onto Blackboard. But I'll get hour 1 and hour 3 up there as soon as I can. I'm going to update GitHub right now. And if you've got any questions, you can just stay on the line and ask me.